Sir, their requests are highly irregular. Most likely illegal if the press gets a hold.
What the hell are you talking about? You know who we are?
Every mission we go on is illegal.
Sergeant Woods, plausible deniability is the backbone of our work.
Al, we're talking about preventing an attack on the free men and women of the world. Give Mr. Adler whatever he wants.
Call of Duty is one of the biggest franchises in the world. Its influence, especially in American culture, cannot be understated. And with the release of Black Ops Cold War, I thought now would be as good a time as any to dissect the franchise's political agenda and determine if it is propaganda. Spoilers, it is. But before we get into it, I thought I should dive into my background with the franchise. Like most people my age, I grew up playing Call of Duty. Some of my fondest memories of my childhood are playing the series, whether it was Modern Warfare 2 online, Spec Ops with my friends, or just playing through the campaigns by myself. This video is coming from someone who played the series since the big red one on my PS2, but has been uninterested in the franchise since Black Ops 2, because since then, it's mostly been rinse and repeat, and whatever the hell this is. And with that out of the way, I think the first question we must answer is, so, what is political? Everything. Literally everything. Video games, movies, books, even this video is political. Games are made by humans with their own views, and just like any other art form, those views will somehow or another make it into their game. Pretty much nothing is apolitical, and usually when people say apolitical, what they really mean is the subject is currently reflecting the perspective of those in power. This notion of wanting art to return to being neutral is where a lot of people get it wrong, because art has never been neutral. Politicizing games isn't new. Now, does everything have meticulously and consciously thought out political messaging within them? No. Are some journalists overanalyzing games for a big headline to trigger hate clicks? Yes. But to say that games have only been political since triggered SJW libtard feminists wrote a BuzzFeed article about them is dumb. Video games reflect the societal norms of the time they were created in, and that is worth discussing. This especially applies to war games. That's what war is, political factions fighting over something. Maybe it's fighting fascism, or maybe it's just for that sweet, sweet oil. But nonetheless, war is political. So games covering that war are political. Especially when that game has the president ordering you to do war crimes and assassinate world leaders. So, now you can choose to ignore those elements, and I think that's totally fair. An amazing part of gaming is the escapism, but those elements are still there. Propaganda, a political agenda. The difference between these two terms is important, so let's be clear about something. You can educate people on a topic with a political bias.
I have political motivations, but you can bring students to arrive at the positions I hold by presenting information to them in an unbiased and fact-oriented way. It is the process of learning that enriches people's minds, not just the information they have.
That process of learning is crucial. And that's where propaganda differentiates from political agenda. It doesn't intend to educate or provide people with differing viewpoints. Noam Chomsky, a father of modern linguistics and perhaps the most significant political thinker of our time, discusses propaganda as a result of a larger system of controlled information by elites. His works primarily focus on the corporate and political elites' filtering of information for the benefit of their interests, and how that usually pertains to America's continued imperialism around the globe. He writes, "In its dependencies, the United States must often turn to violence to restore democracy. At home, more subtle means are required, the manufacture of consent, deceiving the stupid masses with necessary illusions, covert operations that the media and Congress pretend not to see until it all becomes too obvious to be suppressed." Propaganda relies on necessary illusions and emotionally potent oversimplifications where the main determinant of one's ideology is emotion over truth. But how does this apply to Call of Duty? The overarching takeaway of the Call of Duty campaigns are the reinforcement of American exceptionalism, with a consistent effort to justify war-hawking American foreign policy, particularly when it comes to the war on terror and restoring democracy around the globe. Or in other words, the games are lying to you.
We must stop the terror. I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. Agree. Of course I would. How can your country be wrong? Just like completely, totally wrong.
Despite it being touted as a positive in recent years, American exceptionalism is an academic term critical of Americans viewing their country as inherently superior, and thus, that all of its actions, foreign and domestic, are justified and good. I would also argue that American exceptionalism extends to attacking any criticism of the country as treasonous or un-American.
Move to France, Dixie Chicks!
In this video, I'm going to go through a number of Call of Duty campaigns, some more briefly and some more in depth, discussing them through the lens of American exceptionalism and its effect on American society. The first two Call of Duty games are split between three different perspectives of World War II, the American, British, and Soviet campaigns. The perspectives are mostly from individual units, emphasizing the actual tasks they have to get done. And the games have more of a mission structure rather than an overarching fictional narrative, though there is definitely a perspective here.
These are potatoes, Comrade Commissar. Why are we using potatoes instead of real grenades?
Call of Duty 2, the big red one, however, is where the series shifts towards more character-driven narratives rather than a simple mission structure.
I tried to get some time off for that. Maybe go home. Wouldn't you? Getting shot at here is still better than selling shoes for my girlfriend's dad back home. Seriously, you can see some pretty scary stuff when we take off people's shoes all day.
This game is completely different from Call of Duty 2, a different campaign, multiplayer, and developer, but is still considered an expansion/side story to the original second game. The Big Red One's campaign uses vignettes produced by the military channel. They're in the spirit of old war propaganda and are used for expository purposes.
Through the unmatched heroism of the 1st Infantry Division, Allied forces were able to overpower Axis troops at Jela and Troina.
We are pleased to partner with the military channel for our Call of Duty brand, said Dusty Welch, Activision's Vice President of Global Brand Management. They are providing us with compelling World War II video content that will take players back in time and draw them even further into the epic and cinematic Call of Duty experience. As part of the agreement, the military channel also aired a half-hour special on the Big Red One, America's most decorated fighting unit, and on the making of the Big Red One. Activision cited that this added greater authenticity to the Call of Duty brand. Though I'd say that these vignettes are used in more of a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, this is a notable shift in the game's presentation.
No mission too difficult, no sacrifice too great. Duty first.
R.I.P. Brooklyn. Call of Duty 3 goes back to the original 2's formula after the Big Red One.
Back to formula.
Not much to say here. For the most part, these games are pretty tame in terms of overt political messaging, other than being anti-fascist, which is pretty epic. Maybe some mild American exceptionalism here and there. I will note that I think World War II is ripe for interpretation, not only due to its significance and intrigue as part of US history, but also because the US forces are recognizable protagonists against quite literal supervillains, the Nazis. The games also usually take place in Europe rather than the Pacific theater, because then that comes close to acknowledging that we nuked hundreds of thousands of innocent people. But after 5 different games in World War II, it was time to go in a new direction. Modern Warfare. Modern Warfare. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare is one of the most revolutionary shooters ever. Its gritty and tactical approach paving the way for most contemporary first-person shooters. But underneath its revolutionary approach is often a propagandic, jingoistic view of the American war on terror and decades of US foreign policy. Or in other words,
it's lying to you.
Unlike the usual 3-country-specific campaign style, Call of Duty 4 has a more film-like plot, with interlaced storylines from the perspectives of
Sergeant Paul Jackson
and Sergeant Soap McTavish.
What the hell kind of name is Soap?
This is also the first Call of Duty game with a narrative that continues into future games, with recurring characters and factions, so there's a lot more to discuss here in terms of character and story. So bust out that sepia color grading, because we're going to the Middle East. The game takes place in 2011 in a global political landscape in turmoil. A civil war has started in Russia, and a coup in Saudi Arabia is underway, led by al-Assad. Meanwhile, Captain Price leads the Bravo team on the offensive. We then take the perspective of President al-Fulani as we hear al-Assad's tirade against the United States and the West. We see many innocent people shot and killed, as well as the destruction of the city. Little do we know we are being delivered to our death. Soap and Captain Price then uncover intelligence that Al-Assad is in possession of a nuclear device. Oh, wrong picture. The next day, the US launches a full-scale assault on Al-Assad's presidential palace, which ends in thousands dead as a nuclear device detonates. One of the deaths being the game's protagonist, Sergeant Paul Jackson. This is one of the most iconic images from the game. Price and his team raid a village in search for Al-Assad, where they find and kill him. There, it's revealed that Al-Assad was in cahoots with the leader of the ultranationalists, Imran Zakhaev. Imran Zakhaev. Then the game takes kind of a weird turn where you visit Ronald Reagan's grave and you must sacrifice your firstborn child to the almighty blood emperor of trickle-down economics.
And thou shalt not let any seed survive in the fire of Reagan. Let us mix our blood in the name of God.
You then play in one of my all-time favorite COD missions, All Gillied Up. The mission is a stealth operation where you attempt to eliminate Zakhaev, but no matter where you shoot him, the shot misses and you sever his arm. After you narrowly escape, a joint task force attempts to capture Zakhaev's son, Victor, to try and find his father's whereabouts.
Tell me, what do you know about my father's whereabouts?
Soon they corner Victor on a roof of an apartment building. Refusing to surrender, he commits suicide. Imran retaliates by taking control of a nuclear launch facility and subsequently launching nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles with the potential of causing 41 million casualties. You play alongside the SAS and Force Recon that fight through the facility, seize the command room, and remotely destroy the missiles over the Atlantic Ocean. The team then tries to escape in military trucks, but are soon stuck after a helicopter destroys the bridge. The man himself arrives and begins killing wounded soldiers when arriving loyalists in their helicopter destroy his helicopter. So many helicopters. With Imran now distracted, Price slides Soap an M1911 and Soap shoots him in a climactic finale. As we journey through this campaign, we are indoctrinated into the opinion that the United States is justified in its invasion, and that it's essential to stopping the threat of global terrorism. You ride within a sea of helicopters and ships, listening to uplifting music as the heroic Americans save the Middle East from ruin.
Spotters have a possible fix on Al-Assad in a building at the west end of this town. We're gonna secure the perimeter and grab Al-Assad. Hoorah! Lock and load.
Shoreline coming into view.
The mythology of uncertainty is essential to the engine of the war on terror. The idea that there's an amorphous enemy that can be hidden anywhere among any population, sheltered by any government, unaccountable to traditional structures of power, is the logic behind the war on terror's most horrific excesses. The Patriot Act, extrajudicial imprisonment and torture, these were actions taken under the justification that America was facing an unprecedented, hidden evil that could appear anywhere, anytime. The mythology of uncertainty is one of the core building blocks of war that never has to end, so long as those in power don't want it to. Outside of being perceived as virtuous saviors of democracy, the United States is always portrayed as threatened, awaiting the next attack from unknown adversaries, and thus should not be bound by international law to protect themselves. When in reality, the United States has been on the offensive, in a perpetual state of war since World War II, and especially since 9/11. Modern warfare rarely explores the merits of interventionism. Instead, it's portrayed as a given. An actual quote from the game: "If at first you don't succeed, call an airstrike." Are we sure the speaker is unknown? Now you could play devil's advocate and say, well, technically this is a hypothetical reality, so it's not fair to critique it. In fact, that's exactly what Jacob Minkoff, the campaign and gameplay designer for their Modern Warfare reboot, says himself.
I don't think it's a political game.
Really?
But the thing is that people read into that in different ways, right?
Yeah, like that's a tough, what do you mean by political?
That doesn't mean anything, right? The question, is this a political game, doesn't actually mean anything, because it's what does the word political mean to you? Do we touch topics that bear a resemblance to the geopolitics of the world we live in today? Hell yeah, because this is that is the subject matter of modern warfare. Are we telling a story that has anything to do with the specific governments of any countries that we are portraying? No.
Now, I could spend 20 minutes saying how insane that claim is, how that claim would mean that there's no such thing as political allegory or satire, or how that undermines basic tenets of genres like science fiction, or how, again, there is no such thing as apolitical. But the point here is that even though these factions are fictional, these games aren't created in a vacuum. They are based in the real world and therefore reflect the current geopolitical landscape, arguably more so than the fantasy sci-fi genres. The similarities of the US invasion in Modern Warfare and the Bush-era narrative that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction is obvious.
I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously.
The difference, of course, is that Saddam didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and the Bush administration knew this. The difference is that Saddam was backed by the United States until it became contrary to US interests. Modern Warfare's campaign further obfuscates these historical realities. And if you think Modern Warfare's finale is over the top, wait until you see the sequel. Compared to the somewhat grounded and historical depictions of war in previous games, Modern Warfare 2 is when the series shifts towards a more schlocky type tone, with more set pieces, explosions, and badassery. It made me want to get another tribal tattoo and listen to Trap's new album, Shadow Work. And by schlocky, I mean over the top, unrealistic, and goofy. COD has always had that over the top action, but Modern Warfare 2 is where they really stepped it up a notch. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but think of it as Saving Private Ryan versus Commando.
Let off some steam, Bennett.
Rather than typical boots-on-the-ground soldiers as part of a larger global war, you are now this action hero badass who single-handedly maintains freedom and determines the outcome of global wars. This sort of ultra badass bro gamer culture was really popularized with this game. Don't get me wrong, I'm a sucker for occasional action movie badassery.
Let off some steam, Bennett.
It's cathartic watching John Wick tear through a legion of nondescript baddies, but Call of Duty's villains are anything but nondescript. They're an evil, insidious outside force attempting to end our world and way of life.
Al, we're talking about preventing an attack on the free men and women of the world.
You have your villains, and you have your heroes. And a pure and simple reason why one is right, and the other is wrong. There is no room for nuance, exploration, or learning. A bro power fantasy is one thing when you're killing zombies, demons, or aliens, but it's inherently different when you're portraying geopolitics. After Captain Price and Soap stop the nuclear attack on the United States, the incident is covered up by the Russian government. Here we get some voiceover from newcomer General Shepard that almost seems like a response to the previous game.
Boundaries shift, new players step in, but power always finds a place to rest its head. History is written by the victor, and here I am thinking we'd won.
Imran is made a martyr, and the ultranationalists, now led by Makarov, organize terrorist attacks. One of these attacks is the infamous mass shooting at the international airport in Moscow, where undercover operative Joseph Allen is killed and subsequently framed for the attack. This leads to a declaration of war and subsequent invasion of the United States. This mission has become infamous in the rhetoric around the COD series, and by those maliciously muddying the conversation in mass shooting debates.
The video games, the movies, the internet stuff is so violent. It's so incredible. I see it.
The Moscow airport attack has clear similarities to 9/11 and the subsequent propaganda campaign that coerced us into the war on terror. At this point, maybe the developers are setting up an exploration of this. Meanwhile, Task Force 141 searches for evidence proving Makarov's involvement in the massacre, leading them to Brazil in search for weapons dealer Alejandro Rojas.
He's gonna get away! No, he's not.
Whoa! 141 then infiltrates a gulag in search for the mysterious prisoner 627, who is revealed to be Captain Price. Price then joins Soap and Shepard to track down Makarov, but not before they raid a Russian submarine to try and end the war, where Price ends up launching a nuclear missile intended for DC into space and inadvertently blowing up the International Space Station. You see what I mean by schlocky now? Back in the US, it is Modern Warfare Olympus Has Fallen 2, You play alongside troops to retake the White House. On the other side of the world, Price and Soap steal data from Makarov's safe house, where we get the greatest anime betrayal of all time. The war-hawking sergeant is the villain. I'll give it some credit for that.
History is written by the victor. History is filled with liars. If he lives and we die, his truth becomes written and ours is lost.
We then go on a batshit crazy chase to kill Shepard, where you end up shooting down his helicopter and throwing a throwing knife in his eye. Even though Shepard's heel turn speaks volumes about the contemporary war-hungry nature of the United States, Modern Warfare 2 rarely gets past its consistent American exceptionalism and the bro power fantasy tone. On one hand, Shepard is motivated by greed and the continuation of a murderous war for selfish reasons. But on the other, the game still has moments like this.
When we going to Moscow?
Not soon enough, man. But I know we're gonna burn it down when we get there.
When the time's right, Corporal. When the time's right.
Murder innocent civilians? Fuck yeah, brother. The irony in that single line of dialogue has to be some sort of record. In fact, it could probably sum up my entire video.
Shepard will be a hero, because all you need to change the world is one good lie and a river of blood.
Not soon enough, man. But I know we're gonna burn it down when we get there.
Do you see how these two ideologies are in direct conflict with one another? The irony is that Modern Warfare cannot see the truth of these statements when it comes to their own country's actions. So close, yet so far. Call of Duty Modern Warfare? No, Modern Warfare. No, The Modern Warfare reboot has its fair share of problems too. For the sake of time, I'll focus on one mission that has already got headlines, the Highway of Death. By the way, if you want to watch a longer video on the Modern Warfare reboot, check out Jacob Geller's video on it. I'll link it in the description. So the Highway of Death is a real event that occurred in Kuwait and Iraq, where the US Army bombed a retreating army alongside dozens of innocent civilians. But that's not how Call of Duty describes it. In Modern Warfare, the attack was by the Russians.
The Highway of Death. The Russians bombed it during the invasion, killing the people trying to escape.
The game even goes as far as advocating for waterboarding and torture. Call of Duty can't truly explore themes of interventionism, torture, or the war on terror, because that would inspire introspection and critical thinking. It has to be simple, shallow, and romanticizing. Interventionism saves lives, torture gets results, and the threat of global terrorism is undeniable. The series' misrepresentation of history is more or less taken at face value, as players and reviewers alike trust the game's push for authenticity.
It immerses you and captivates you from start to finish, and the historical context of these events gives it such an impact because this stuff actually happened.
Let's not forget the Black Ops series, where in the first game, you are tasked with murdering Fidel Castro during the Bay of Pigs, a CIA-backed coup. And now, Call of Duty is tackling the Cold War in a game that seems to be uniquely shameless in its jingoism and propaganda. I don't know about you, but this trailer makes me want to overthrow a democratically elected leader in South America and replace him with an authoritarian who's more favorable to corporations.
Well, I can change that in a hurry.
Gaming has historically had a relationship with the US military. The US Marine Corps famously used Doom 2 to teach new recruits. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Eisminger saying, "We were tasked with looking at commercial off-the-shelf computer games that might teach an appreciation for the art and science of war." The Pentagon and State Department have often worked closely with game developers when crafting war-related content. The same can be seen in Hollywood. Though AAA developers will claim it is merely for authenticity, this is obviously a huge conflict of interest, and I think it's fair to assume that it's led to some favorable framing, to say the least.
What would you tell your recruiter right now?
Fucking die.
What would you tell your recruiter right now?
I don't even remember that. Why didn't you tell me to replay?
What would you tell your recruiter right now?
Eat shit and die, you fat bitch.
What would you tell your recruiter right now?
Fuck you in the unit.
What would you tell your recruiter right now?
Bitch, kill yourself.
This past summer, the US Army, Navy, and Air Force each started Twitch channels, where dedicated esports teams stream Call of Duty, Rocket League, and other shooters, and target young kids as young as 13 into joining the military without any sort of supervision or permission. Viewers are shown they could win an elite Xbox Series 2 controller if they enter a giveaway. The link sends them to a recruiting form with no additional mention of a contest, odds, or when a drawing will occur. So, using a game that glorifies and sometimes flat out lies about the US's role in the global political landscape, the US military is recruiting kids online. This sort of predatory recruiting isn't new, with recruiters often targeting those who are looking for an education, citizenship, or a steady income. But rather than being at your school, these recruitment practices are now able to reach young kids online. Call of Duty isn't apolitical or just a fictional game. Its perspective on American war and foreign policy echoes attitudes that justify war crimes and occupation of foreign countries, obfuscating facts with fiction. The reality is these games are a large piece in a pipeline of endless war, and to say that they undermine atrocities that the US committed overseas would be an understatement.
Well, what point of view would you expect to come out of this? I mean, without any further assumptions, what you'd predict is that what comes out is a picture of the world, a perception of the world, that satisfies the needs and the interests and the perceptions of the sellers, the buyers, and the product.
So when it comes to the question as to if Call of Duty games are propaganda, the answer is unequivocally yes.